Bienvenidos to
MERENDIANDO from home as we continue to be in self-isolation. And by the magic of Zoom, today our special guest is Carmen Aguirre.
Carmen Aguirre is a Chilean-Canadian author, actor, and playwright. She has won multiple awards for her work and has over 80 stage, film, and television acting credits. She's a core artist at the Vancouver Electric Company Theatre and co-founder of the Canadian Latinx Theatre Artists Coalition, or CALTAC.
She has written and co-written over 25 plays, and she's the author of 2 best-selling memoirs, Something Fierce, Memoirs of a Revolutionary Daughter, which was also the winner of CBC Canada Reads in 2012, and its best-selling sequel, Mexican Hooker #1, and my other roles since the revolution.
We talked to her about her work, politics, and being an artist based in Vancouver.
And because this is Merendiando, we had some meriendas, or some snacks, before we talked. So Monica, what did you snack on?
I had the same snack as last time, so a little Peruvian chocolate. What about you, Camila?
We love consistency. I had a delicious Colombian treat that's like dulce de leche with bocadillo de guayaba, so like guayaba paste, dulce de leche. Oh my freaking god, I've never tasted anything so good. It's from Vélez. It's wild. I found it in the back of my pantry. I'm very thankful. But you know what the real treat was? Talking to Carmen Aguirre.
So get a snack and let's get started.
Have you spent a lot of time in Zoom, Carmen?
Well, in the last few weeks, yes, I would say I have. Yeah.
Did you know Zoom before this?
Yeah, so I'm part of Electric Company Theatre. I'm a core artist at Electric Company Theatre. And of the, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. Yeah, 4 core artists, only one of them lives in town, and that's me.
Yes, that sounds right.
2 of them live in Toronto and the other one lives in Victoria. So we do spend a lot of time on Zoom anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly more now, in the last month. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of theater work kind of already started migrating to digital platforms before this, like, just to make things happen across distance and other reasons that might be artistic. But this time has been really pushing everybody online, I guess. How are you right now with everything that's going on in BC, like in terms of your specific, even premier, like your own policies on how you're going to deal with this pandemic? Like how are you as an artist dealing right now?
I'm doing fine. I mean, I grew up, I spent most of my young life in South America, living under ultra right-wing dictatorships. So that meant a lot of like state of siege, states of emergency, lots of curfews. So yeah, I'm totally fine. And it hasn't really affected me. Like, I'm a very lucky person. It hasn't affected me too much financially, because at this time of the year, I was slated to spend time more at home doing a bunch of writing and administration. Also, I'm going to be in a play, like it's probably the only play that has gone forward, and it's all moved online. And we go into rehearsals. This is with Rumble Theater. It's a script by a Chilean playwright called Guillermo Calderón. And this script is called B, like the letter B. And it's the Canadian premiere of this play here in Vancouver. And of course, it had to move online.
I love that play, by the way. It's such a good script.
That's
it's so beautiful
that you love it. I don't.
Tell me about that.
I feel mixed about it because I hear people love it and some people don't.
I mean, I loved reading it. I've never seen it performed.
Right.
I loved reading it.
Okay. Well, it's, and I say that I don't with a huge respect towards the writer. I mean,
of course,
I think he's an incredible writer, and I think it's a very well-written play. And it's an honor to be in it and to tackle it. So I guess what I'm saying when I say I don't is I find it incredibly cynical, pessimistic, nihilistic, and not a accurate, if I may be so bold, portrayal of youth resistance in Chile, especially since the uprising that began last October. The character that I'm playing is actually written as a man, and I'm going to play it as a man. And he's supposed to be about my age, right? I'm 52, so maybe, I would say about my age. And he's a guy who's been around since the 80s in the resistance, except that the way he's written is that he's a terrorist. And as a person myself who was in the resistance in Chile in the 80s, in the MIR, I don't know a single soul in the MIR, nor in the Frente Patriótico Manuel Rodriguez, which was the other armed movement in Chile at the time, who would ever have done or said the things that this character is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I've checked with a lot of people in doing my research for this play, a lot of people who were in both movements, and they're all just shocked that they're just like anybody who would be speaking like this man speaks. So he has lines like, oh, it doesn't matter how many people die.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing, right? Which of course we were completely the opposite, right? If there was ever any talk of a target, it could only ever be a military target. Any talk of civilian casualties it never happened. And if anybody came into the movement with that kind of talk, they would be immediately expelled. So the only two movements I know in Latin America that have ever spoken that way are the Shining Path in Peru and the FARC in Colombia, right? So those are the reasons why I don't like it. So not the actual writing. I love the writing. I love the characters. I love the complexity of the script. I love his skill. I have a real problem with what he's saying or trying to say. And mainly it's just the absolute cynicism of the script, that there is no hope, and that these three characters who call themselves revolutionaries are actually terrorists, which is completely and utterly inaccurate and an insult. Having said all this, I'm really interested and excited about working with this team of people, of doing a Chilean play. It's a very Chilean play, like the way that it's written, like he's really captured the way Chileans talk, and and bringing this point of view into the room. I've been in touch with the playwright, and we are trying to find a moment to connect, because I will say everything I just said to him.
Yeah.
And ask him what he was thinking, or what he was trying to say, or what kind of research he did, so that's what I'm preparing to do online. We go into rehearsals on April 27th, and
Oh wait, it just dropped that whole play, you're moving it online.
Yeah,
that totally looks like it could work. Yeah,
I
hear
think
that.
it'll
I see
totally
it.
work. I mean, you know the play, but it's basically three characters preparing to bomb a bank, right? And so it's all very top secret, and they're in a safe house preparing to do this. So it kind of like makes sense online.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, bringing it to the very contemporary now reality of how things are done.
To hear you talk and to talk about that you were part of the Resistencia, how do you deal, because I, as an immigrant, sometimes I'm afraid to go back home and be my true self, which is a queer woman. How do you deal with fear? Because even how you were talking about, like, I'm going to go say this how I feel, and not feel the fear or anything of like putting your opinions or what you want in front of you, it's so impressive. So like, how did you manage fear over following what you believe in, or like what you need to be there for people?
Well, I lived in a state of chronic terror the entire time that I was in the MIR in Chile, and we all did, right? A lot of people didn't make it in terms of died young from cancers and all kinds of diseases that ate them up from the inside. And they themselves said that they felt that the reason they got so sick was because of living in a state of chronic terror. There were a lot of close calls that I had. And I think that I'm an extremely privileged person, and it's kind of like my job. I mean, I have this platform as an artist, right? So I see it as my job and my responsibility to speak these things. The only time that I felt, when I go to Chile, I don't feel afraid, because I'm nothing to them, right? Like, I'm not involved in anything. I'm not part of any movement. I'm not an activist. So who cares about me, right? They have much bigger fish to fry in Chile, right? So it would be incredibly self-important and egomaniacal of me to go, oh, if I go to Chile, they're going to come after me, right? The one time that I did feel afraid was when my first memoir, Something Fierce, Memoirs of a Revolutionary Daughter, which I took a lot of time to think about and to write because I knew there would be consequences. And there were. And what happened, so the day that I felt, it wasn't a day, it was a few days where I felt like, oh shit, this is it, was the book was chosen to be part of the debates for Canada Reads in 2012, right? And it ended up winning, which is amazing for the book. But on the first day of the debates, which, you know, were being streamed live on the internet. It's a huge deal, literally millions of people watching live, right? In the first 5 minutes, one of the people that was defending a different book basically said, Carmen Aguirre is a bloody terrorist. I don't know how Canada ever let her into this country. And when this happened, I was in Ottawa doing a play, and Stephen Harper was the prime minister. And he had kind of passed these anti-terrorism laws, right? Mostly to be used against Indigenous activists in Canada and environmental activists in Canada. But I was in Ottawa by myself in a hotel that whole week, like literally alone. My son was with my mother at that time, and he was quite young. I think he was like 6 years old. I was like 2 blocks away from Parliament Hill where Harper was.
It's always very intense being around Parliament. It's a charged space.
Yeah. So I went into a bit of a spin going, oh shit, now they're coming for me, right? This is it. And I mean, my main concern when I was writing the book and when I published the book was my son. I'm a sole parent. I'm raising him alone. And I was like, okay, if I go to jail, that's really irresponsible parenting, right? Like who's going to be his parent? And being a grandparent is different than being a parent. So that was my big concern. Of course, nothing happened because, again, anybody who looks into me will realize within about 5 seconds that I'm not an activist. I'm not involved in any kind of movement. I'm not involved in anything, right? So really, they have bigger fish to fry. But that's the one time that I have felt like anything even remotely close to fear, right? After, you know, I wrote that book and that happened. And of course, it led to some really good debate on CBC during the Canada Reads debate, because it led to the debate of what is a terrorist, right? And I remember, I think it was the following day that I had to be flown to Toronto. And I was doing my show every night, this one-woman show every night called Blue Box in Ottawa. So during the day, they flew me to Toronto to do a quick interview with George Stroumboulopoulos, and he had this show called, oh God, I think
This Hour, an hour
like
with
that. Yeah, he had a talk show that was very good and very popular.
Yeah.
And so he flew me in just to do a quick interview in which he basically asked me, what is a terrorist? And why do you consider that you are not a terrorist? So
God.
And so then I mean, no, I don't know that he worded it that way, but he wanted me,
Okay.
Just to be clear. Yeah.
Okay.
And so then I think he was defending me, basically. So he really wanted to give me a platform to say why I'm not a terrorist, right? And so I said, I basically said a terrorist is a person who targets civilians for political or religious purposes. And that is absolutely not what the Chilean resistance did, nor is it what the Jewish resistance did during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really created some great debate. You know, having said that, there's been moments like, I think I was touring with the book. That's right, I was touring with the book, and I was in London, England, and I had a bunch of interviews with the BBC. And there I was, you know, because the BBC has so many different shows. You do a whole bunch of different shows at the BBC. So I went to one, it was the international BBC. And this woman sitting across from me who's doing the interview and who presents as very quote unquote progressive, right? Like a full on hippie, like this white hippie woman, right? Purple hair, the whole bit, like the tattoos and the piercings and you know, young. And she says to me, this is live and there are hundreds of millions of people listening around the world. And I'm like, great. And she said, What we really want to know, and she kind of got kind of angry, started attacking me, is
Ooh, love it.
did you kill people? And how many people did you kill? And so of course I
Wow.
froze because I was like, oh, here we go. Like, now I'm going to get arrested in fucking England, where of course, many things went through my mind. One of the first things that went through my mind was like wanting to say to her, would you ask me this if I was a person who you were interviewing who had been in the Jewish resistance or in the French resistance? Probably not, right? But I thought, if I say anything like that, it'll sound like I killed a bunch of people and I'm trying to cover it up.
Truth fears nothing, Carmen.
Yeah, so she probably wanted me to say something like that, right?
Yes.
She probably wanted me to say, why are you asking that, or blah, blah, blah. And so then I totally shut her up by saying, absolutely not. I've never killed a soul. And there was nothing she could do. All she could do was just move on to the next quest. And also, that's the
God.
truth. Of course, I've never killed a soul, right?
I know, but just it's
Yeah.
the way people frame resistance, especially colonizer countries like frickin' England, but also just culturally how we deal with resistance. I have a lot of questions about that. In terms of Canada, like what our culture of resistance is, our culture. As culture creators, we have a lot of responsibility, but also opportunity to shape that. My question is to you, Carmen, like what do you think the culture of resistance is in Canada, if you could speak to it? And Canada, so-called Canada as we know it.
Yeah, it depends what you're referring to as Canada, because most, I'm going to say most, but probably all, but I'll say most, my Indigenous friends in Canada don't consider themselves Canadian.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I think that the kind of resistance that's happening at the Wet'suwet'en is something that is interesting to me to look at, right? And of course, I support it, right? I've been asked, even when I was on the book tour with that first book, quite often people would ask me if I believed in an armed uprising in Canada, if I believe that should happen, right? And I would always say no, because, there needs to be so many things that have to be in place for that even to make sense, right? I think that if anybody walked around Canada right now going, hey, we need to take up arms, they would be labeled crazy.
They have been, that is historical.
Yes, but I mean, like right now, I think that is not in any way, shape, or form a way forward, right? And I don't think that's the way forward, for example, in Latin America. So what do I mean by that? Certainly, the MIR, for example, that I was in, took up arms against the Pinochet dictatorship, which at that time, like I'm talking about the 80s, was considered one of the most repressive dictatorships in the world by many people. There are all kinds of guerrilla organizations that took up arms in the 60s all over Latin America that were really inspired by the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. But if we looked at what happened at the turn of the millennium in Venezuela, for example, right? That was a revolution that was not an armed revolution. It was a revolution with arms. Same with the revolution in Bolivia, right? Evo Morales, who was there for 15 years, right? That was a revolution with arms. So what does that even mean? It means that both Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales, who, let's be super clear, I'm not talking about the individuals, I'm talking about the movements that they represented, right? Those movements had the army backing them, right? The Bolivian army and the Venezuelan army backed those movements, right? So those are revolutions with arms. And I think that's when there was a change for many people in terms of, oh, okay, guerrilla warfare is fucking hard, right? It's absolutely devastating. And I can say this as a person who has participated in it. It is almost indescribable how devastating it is. I'm not saying it wasn't necessary or it might not be necessary still, of course, duh, right? But now that we have these two examples, right, of the Chavista revolution and the revolution in Bolivia, of revolutions that were backed by the armies of both those countries, that's a lot better and quote unquote easier than guerrilla warfare, right? Because when you engage in guerrilla warfare, what has happened historically is the amount of deaths and torture that accompanies it, of mostly poor people, right, is horrible. right? So if there's any way to not go that route,
Yeah.
that is fantastic, right? Don't get me wrong. I believe in systemic change, right? So I understand that there are places in the world, including in Latin America, where guerrilla warfare might still be the way to go. But I was very inspired, as were many people around the world, by the examples of Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez. And again, I mentioned those two names because we are familiar with who they are, but let's be very clear that they represent huge movements of people, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, okay. That leads me to a question, because the three of us have roots in countries that are south of here, and we all live here. And we're all culture makers here. And I guess I'm interested in what is giving you hope right now as an artist located mainly in Vancouver.
What gives me hope? I mean, one of the things that gives me hope always is, for example, the 2000 comunas in Venezuela. I think those are real triumphs of the Chavista, revolution. And to be very clear, I am pro Bolivarian revolution. I know that's a very unfashionable thing to say, and I have no problem saying it. I am with the 6 million Venezuelans who voted for Maduro, because they did not vote for Maduro. They voted for the continuation of a revolutionary process that has been terrorized by the United States with its sanctions, right? So one of the things that the Bolivarian Revolution has done and continues to do, which I find very exciting and gives me so much hope and inspiration, is the comunas, right? There's about 2,000 of them, and many of them in Caracas proper. It's basically groups of people, mostly working class people, get together. And for example, like there's a neighborhood in Caracas. And as an aside, I've been to Venezuela, so I can argue with lots of people if they feel like arguing with me, because I actually have been to Venezuela. So if there might be a poor neighborhood in Caracas where the neighborhood has taken it upon themselves to make that neighborhood a commons of sorts, right? And so they kind of take care of everything and take care of each other with the support of the Bolivarian Revolution. So I like to follow that and like just to see where that's at as often as I can. Obviously, it's difficult to get that kind of information, but I try. That gives me a lot of hope, the comunas in Venezuela. What gives me a lot of hope is that the Bolivarian Revolution is still there with all of its mistakes, with all of its imperfections, with all the levels of corruption. Absolutely, there's so much work to do, but the fact that it's still there, the fact that Cuba is still there, right? Again, with all of its imperfections, with all of its mistakes, it's still there. What gives me hope is the uprising in Chile. Gives me hope is the fact that Argentinians elected Fernandez, who got rid of Macri. I'm very saddened by what happened in Bolivia with the coup there.
I just want to ask you a follow-up question then, because I asked you what, and I love the answer is really very interesting. I asked you what you gave you hope as an artist, and you pointed to really specific social justice movements and justice movements. So clearly it just illustrates that your art is really involved with justice movements. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to be very honest. If we're going to talk about the theater world in Canada, I'm not very hopeful about it, or haven't been, not because of the content that's being created. I think there's some amazing content that's being created, and I admire so many Canadian theater artists. I mean, I wouldn't be, I mean, hello, I work with Canadian theater artists all the time, right? I love them. I'm dismayed by the cancel culture, the deplatforming, the neoliberal identity politics, the censorship and self-censorship that's going on. And it's a real climate, that of fear, right? Which I kind of cut through, and I don't care, and I just say what I want, and I do what I want. But again, I'm a very privileged person. I'm able to do that because the two groups of people that I care about in terms of what they think about me are my friends and my comrades, neither of which are in the theater community. right? So I love all the people that I work with in the theater community. Otherwise, I wouldn't work with them. They're my colleagues, and they mean a lot to me. But if they all get pissed off at me because I say something, I'm not going to lose my community, right? Because my friends are actually not in the theater community, right? And my comrades are not in the theater community. So I have two lives, right? And I consider my non-theater life my real life. So it's a really privileged position. And so I can actually say out loud what so many other people are saying privately, but are afraid to say, and I don't blame them for being afraid, right? Because all their friendships are in the theater community, for example, right? I'm also in a privileged position because I'm old, right? I'm an elder. So I've been at it for like 30 years. And I'm not a 25-year-old person who, you know, is just starting out and who's going to burn a whole bunch of bridges if she just comes out and goes, "Bah," right, and says what I'm saying, right? So that's also a privileged position.
Going off of that. So yeah, not a lot of hope for the theater. What did you say? Industry in Canada, ecology in Canada? I don't think you used either of those words, but would they accurately?
Well, I guess there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that
Yeah.
I hear about a lot, right? In terms of this climate of cancel culture, deplatforming, hyper-fragmentative identity politics. There's fear. Yeah.
Well, okay, my question is, what do you think the abolition of class and that fear have to do with each other?
Well, the thing is that class has nothing to do with identity politics, right?
Okay.
Because people walk around saying, hi, my identity is nothing X, or my identity is fill in the blank, right? But people don't usually walk around saying, hi, my identity is working class, or hi, my identity is middle class. Because the whole point of class is about class relations, right? And as a person who's on the left, as opposed to a liberal, right? I'm not a liberal.
They're very different concepts.
I'm really not a liberal. Let's just put it that way. I'm a leftist. Yeah. As a person who's a leftist, my analysis is that the end goal is the abolition of class, right? And identity politics, the way it has been taken over now by neoliberalism, is that it seeks to be included into capitalism, right? And so it arguably can be included into capitalism, right? Race or gender, right? Whereas capitalism will never include the proletariat, right? And most liberals are not working class, right? Most liberals are middle class and up, right? And they probably won't admit that they're middle or upper middle class. They'll probably say they're not, right? But so there's no kind of pride, as it were, in walking around saying, I'm working class or I'm middle class, right? Certainly there is in terms of race and gender, because the identity politics that we have on the table in the theater community is an identity politics that lacks a structural critique of capitalism and seeks this kind of representation and inclusion in capitalism. So that's why social class is not discussed when it comes to identity politics in the theater community. And I think that one of the main reasons social class is not discussed is because most people in the theater community, and when I say most, I don't mean 90%, I mean more than 50%, right, are middle and upper middle class, right? So, you know, there's not a lot of plays being written out there in the Canadian theater scene, and I'm sure this goes for the whole world, but since we're talking about Canada, right, by working class Canadians. There's some for sure, but there's not a lot, right? And a lot of the characters that we see on our stages are not working class, right? They're not, right?
So then why do you choose this medium? Why is this medium something that you keep engaging with?
Well, it chose me,
Okay.
right? So it's something that it has to be your calling, especially if you're going to stick with it for as long as I have. I was offered a full scholarship to study medicine in Cuba when I was a teenager, when I was 16. And I'm not going to lie, there are many times when I go, that was a mistake to not take it. I didn't take it because, I mean, trust me, it was an incredibly difficult decision because I wanted to join the Chilean resistance. And it was imperative for me that I do that at that time. The year was 1984. If it had been another time, I think I would have, I mean, I know I would have taken it. So that was definitely a turning point, right? To go, oh shit, I didn't take that. Fuck, right? And I have, ever since I have been part of the theater community, which has been since 1990, it has been very, very clear to me that my skill set as a storyteller has had to be put forward to serve the community, which is my point of view anyway as a socialist. Whatever skill set you have, you use it at the service of the community. And so I knew that I was going to put this skill set at the service of the Latinx community. I mean, very specifically the Chilean community, but more broadly the Latinx community, which certainly in 1990 was the poorest demographic in Vancouver, for example. And I grew up, quote unquote, in poverty in Vancouver, right, as a Chilean exile in the 1970s, where we literally had nothing. And my entire community, we were all janitors. We had a great time, don't get me wrong, right? Like all the kids, we'd go and do the janitor work with the parents after school. It was fun, but we were fucking poor. So those are the stories that I knew I wanted to put on stage in Canada. I consider, that a lot of the theater that I see in Canada to have a liberal politic. And so the other thing that I've always been interested in is to put content on Canadian stages that has a unabashedly leftist point of view.
I made this weird joke about my dad because I'm queer and my parents don't know. And I was saying that I figured out that my dad hates communism more than gay people.
Right.
That I started realizing that I can be like, I'm gay, but I love capitalism. My dad will be like, we're still good. Like I started to realize until I moved from Mexico and started living on my own and like paying my own bills, that how much of this idea of how government should run, it was mostly not because of me, but because of parents. So a lot of the ideas, like you're saying, Evo Morales, he went to Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that was like horrifying for my dad.
Yes, I'm sure.
Like horrifying. So like I have a lot of my friends like Argentina, Uruguay, like all those people telling me like this is what's happening in our governments, and then talking to my dad and I'm like, oh no, like we know too much now that we can never talk about politics. So everything you're saying, I'm just like, I know those stories, but not from that perspective. I know those stories from a perspective that is like, it's wrong and it's bad and we don't talk about it.
Yeah. It's funny, just that yesterday I was on WhatsApp talking to my two best friends in Bolivia, because I lived in Bolivia when I was a teenager. And part of our front, because I was there with my mother and stepfather who were running a safe house for the MIR in Bolivia. There was an ultra right-wing dictatorship in Bolivia when we lived there, this guy called Garcia Mesa. And our facade was that we had to basically kind of be part of the 1% in Bolivia. So that's what we did. And so I was sent to this school where my classmate was the son of Garcia Mesa, right? And, the sons and daughters of the generals were in my class. So two of my best friends at that time are like ultra right wing and part of the elite of Bolivia. And I'm still very, very, very close to them. So yesterday I was talking to both of them on the WhatsApp. So yeah, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, Monica. Like, I just laugh. I mean, I'm on the floor laughing with these two because the things that come out of their mouths, and they know where I stand, but the friendship is so strong that it doesn't matter. For example, they were both saying things like, and they of course took part in the coup against Evo Morales, and they're very proud of it, extremely proud of. Yay, we financed it, we did it, oh thank God we got rid of that motherfucker, right? And so they're so anti quote unquote communist, because again, they probably don't even know what communism is, right? That they believe that the Chinese government created the virus in order to do away with as many poor gringos as possible. They were like, those poor gringos, oh my God, our poor United States, right? They're dying because of those terrible communists in China. I mean, it's, no analysis, no nothing. And both these people are very smart, don't get me wrong, right? Like one of them is an economist. He has a PhD in economics and teaches economics in Santa Cruz. The other one is equally learned, right? They're just extremely right wing. I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I understand.
Yeah, and it just, one of the most revolutionary things you can do is be a human being with other human beings, regardless of their indoctrination, I guess.
Yes, and they truly believe what they believe because they are actually protecting their interests, right? They are part of the 1% of Bolivia. They'll never admit that, right? But that's what they are, right? They are part of the 1% of Bolivia, and they will do anything and everything, which has been proven over and over and over again historically, to defend their wealth, which includes control of the land, control of the government, control of anything and everything, right? And so Evo Morales' huge crime for them was that he was interested in redistributing the wealth of Bolivia, right? I mean, the last time I was there 5 years ago for this, our 30-year high school reunion, which I went to, you know, I kept saying to them, we'd be walking down the street and they were in like absolute frenzy because Evo Morales was still in power and doing very well. So I just spent the whole time laughing hysterically because I find them funny, walking through the city of La Paz as they would rage and rage and rage. And I would be, and I mean, of course, and I would go on and on about how much I love Evo Morales. But one thing I did ask them, both of them, was, okay, let me get something straight here. Both of you still have your mansions. You both still have your very well-paid jobs. You both are extremely wealthy. Evo Morales has done absolutely nothing to take away your mansion or your job or your money or anything. So what's the problem? I knew what they were going to say, but I wanted to hear them say it, right? And so one of them said, the problem is that the other day, or it might have been a few months before that, I was walking down the street and I won't say the word I won't use the slur that he used. So, and I met an indigenous person, but he used the slur, was walking, you know, I was walking down the sidewalk and he was walking towards me and he was a broom vendor. So he had like 10,000 brooms around himself, like selling these brooms. And he wouldn't get out of the way for me. And he just stood there. And I said to him, slur, fill in the blank with the slur, get out of the way. I'm trying to pass. And the broom vendor said, oh, no, I'm not getting out of the way. You're getting out of the way because we rule this country now. And so then both of them started to rage and rage and rage. That's what's happening.
Wow.
Don't you understand?
You can't even, you know how to dance, right? You know how simple it is to just slide to the left. Like, why?
Yeah, so I just said, all I want to know is where this broom vendor lives because I want to go and kiss his feet and then make a monument for him in the square.
Absolutely.
But I forgot the point. But the point is,
the point is, don't talk to your father.
The point is,
no, but I there's something I think about because now when we do our check-ins as family check-ins about what the pandemic is happening, because my sister's in Texas, I'm here, and my parents are in Mexico, and it's such a weird thing to really check in and be like, how's your government doing today? Instead of being like, how are you doing today, mommy? It's like, what did Mexico do? It's weird to navigate, to know who's getting money from the government and who's not in the world. Like who's getting that support and who's not.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I mean, when my family asks about it, I'm like, and they're like, "Wow, you're so lucky to be in Canada. Your prime minister is a feminist, and you get like $2,000 Canadian dollars a month." I'm like, yeah, but like those $2,000 we stole from you. We mined it out of your earth. 1, 2. That's a really low bar. My prime minister is a feminist. I'm sorry. Like, just because Canada has this facade of progressiveness in terms of neoliberalism does not mean that we cannot critique it. And it's very frustrating for me when conversations stop because Canada is a cool country.
I get it, but I will say it as an immigrant.
I know.
I'm happy.
I know we have different perspectives. Yeah.
It's such a weird thing because I will understand that, and then but for me being from another country and seeing people from my country right now, I'm like it's this thing of like, where are we safer, even though it's not the best.
Yes. I don't deny that's true. I think
Yeah.
that's super true. But I also think our positions are different. I like have a Canadian passport. I was born here. I have the privilege to say what I'm saying without the same repercussions as you would have if you were to say it. Okay. So I would, we had prepared a lot of questions, and a lot of them were actually about your work itself, like your pieces in your project.
The first play I ever wrote was called In a Land Called I Don't Remember, and that was produced in 1995. Then it was Chile con Carne. Then it was a play that I kind of co-wrote. It was like a collective creation with the Latino theater group, which I ran here in Vancouver in the 90s. And that play was called ¿Qué pasa with la raza A? Then it was Refugee Hotel, I guess. Then there was another play that I kind of co-wrote with the Latino theater group called Spicks and Span. I don't remember the order of the plays, but I guess then there was Blue Box, and then there's Broken Tailbone. And I also wrote two plays that were adaptations of Eduardo Galeano's work. One was called Dreams of Reality. And we meaning an artist called James Fagan Tate and another artist called Sonia Norris. The three of us adapted this book by Eduardo Galeano called The Book of Embraces for the stage. And then James Fagan Tate and I adapted another Galeano book called Walking Words for the stage. And we called it The Body Says, I Am a Fiesta. And then with the Electric Company 20 years ago, we adapted Jorge Amado's Dona Flor and her two husbands for the stage. So anyway, I could go on here.
But Manuelita, is it the same character Chile con Carne than Refugee?
It's similar. Yes, yes, I would say. So what was happening when I did Chile con Carne, which was dramaturged and directed by Guillermo Verdecchia, that was 25 years ago. You know, we had all these great characters in Chile con Carne, right? Like we kept going, oh my God, these characters are so great, like Juana the Chickens or whoever else, right? And you know, we want to know who Joselito is. And of course, Chile con Carne is a one-person show. So yes, the Refugee Hotel is definitely a continuation, or kind of like not even a sequel, but a prequel to Chile con Carne, right? Because Chile con Carne picks up after they've, it takes place after they've left the hotel. And so I would say Refugee Hotel is more like a prequel. And, there's like 11 or 12 characters on stage.
I think we were talking yesterday, like kind of preparing for this, and we were talking about Refugee Hotel as a cornerstone of Latin Canadian theater work, that a touchstone for, I think, a lot of people in our local Toronto community who are Latinx. We like know about Refugee Hotel, and not only do we know the play, we know a bit about its production story, about the cast that was in it. It's like very much a touchstone for narratives, like storytelling on stage about Latinx identity, like experience. And so it's kind of part of a legacy that I feel that a lot of people are walking down. Like we're gathering community here in Toronto, at least, of like Latinx theater creators. We're trying to build the foundations in an ecology that's healthy. And I know that that's something that you're really involved in Vancouver. So my question is twofold. One, we would love to hear about Coyuntura, just like about your experience maybe, and maybe what you left the space with, left the gathering with. And then I think it will tie into my second question, which is, what is it like to be an artist in Vancouver?
Yeah, so Coyuntura was incredible. I mean, it's something that we had envisioned for a long time, and were able to get funding from the fantastic Canada Council to do it. It was like a game changer for us, because us meaning Caltech, the Canadian Latinx Theater Artists Coalition, because it was the first time in Canadian history that we had something like that, an international Latinx theater gathering. And we knew it would have to start kind of small. Like of course our ideal scenario is like there's 200 Latinx theater people from across North America and beyond, yeah, right? But let's just see who shows up kind of thing. So it was incredible to have people, like Bea, all in the same room, right? Bea, right? We don't need to even say who she is, right? Beatriz Pisano, who founded and runs Aluna Theater, right? With Lina de Guevara, right? Who's an 86-year-old elder who was the first Latinx theater artist in Canada, right? And who started Puente Theater in Victoria in the 1980s. Next to Evelina Fernandez, who is a living legend, Chicana theater artist who started the Los Angeles Theater Company and the Latino Theater Company in LA. Next to, Nancy Garcia Loza, who co-founded and runs Alta in Chicago, right? Next to Barbara Santos, right, who runs the Theater of the Oppressed Center in Berlin and who came in from Rio, which is where she's from, and who trained with Augusto Boal for many years and was Augusto Boal's right-hand person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on here. So that was incredible for us. Just like all we wanted was to create time and space for people to connect. That's all we wanted. So every night we all went for dinner together and we spent hours and hours and hours and hours just talking and eating. And Caltac members, like we'd all kind of look across the table or down the table at each other and just be like, this is it. This is all we wanted. If we could just get all these people around a table and just talk, right, for hours because they have nowhere else to go because, they've come here for this reason, then that's all we care about, right? And that's what happened. And I know that a lot of connections were made. And even just being able to facilitate something like this, right? Like a woman called Monica Sanchez, who's a renowned Chicana playwright in the United States, is currently teaching at a university in Colorado, in a small town of Colorado, where like she feels incredibly isolated, right? It's very white. She just feels extremely isolated. So she flew herself up for that weekend and she was beside herself, just, yay, I get to be around Latinx people eating and talking. We're so happy we got to facilitate that. We're so happy, right? Or somebody like Natercia Napoleão, who's a young Brazilian actor in Edmonton, who also feels very isolated in Edmonton as a Latina artist. And she found her way to Coyuntura, right? And she was also just like, oh my God, I'm sitting around a table talking to people like me. So it was incredible. It was, our ideal scenario was to do it every year, right? And just get it bigger and bigger and bigger.
So then my second question is, in your opinion, what is it like to be a theater artist in Vancouver right now? Or what is it like for you?
It's great for me. I mean, Vancouver is my hometown. It's the only city I've ever lived in Canada. I love it. I have extremely close friends here, and friends that are not in the theater community. My family's here. My son is from here. Like he was born here. It's a really good base for me because I do a lot of I do my writing here. It's a good base for me. Of course, I've many times been told that I should actually live in Toronto, and that's probably true career-wise. But also, I consider myself a very West Coast person of the Americas, right? I'm from Chile, which is West Coast, right? That is to say, I don't know that I could live without the ocean and the mountains. And when I lived in Bolivia, of course, I was not on the ocean, but I was in the middle of the Andes Mountains. So yeah, no, it's great. It's great for me, and I love the theater community here. I love being part of Electric Company. Yeah, it's great.
And just to finish, a personal thing of mine. You were in the L Word.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, it was because I'm rewatching it because gay, and I was like, oh my God, it's Carmen.
Yeah, the L Word, that was so fun to shoot that. But the thing is that I was supposed to be like a guest star, like on 2 of the episodes. And I ended up looking kind of like an extra, which is fine with me. I don't care. I still got paid because they kind of, there was like these 2 episodes that took place in jail, in the women's jail, which they completely cut those entire episodes because the episodes themselves, they just felt weren't working, like the writing, or I don't know. I think they felt it got a bit too camp for the hour. Like it got quite camp, and they were great. We had so much fun. We shot for like, I don't remember how many days, but at least a week. We had so much fun shooting these like hilarious scenes in the jail, in the women's jail.
Oh, that sounds fun.
which in the end, those episodes never even made it into the actual show, which is too bad because we had so much fun shooting them, and there was some really great stuff in them. Like really, they hired these amazing actors. So I thought I wasn't going to be in it at all in the end. And to be totally blunt, I've never watched it because I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to watch it.
I can just send you all my DVDs.
Oh.
There's ways, if you want.
And our question that we ask all the time to close up our podcast is, what is your favorite merienda snack?
Oh, God. Let's think. Well, it depends where I am. I would say there's nothing like the Chilean once, which is how we call merienda, once. And it's because of the bread, Chilean bread, which I think is the best bread ever. So you basically like all sit down at around 5 o'clock and you have tea. Chileans drink a lot of tea as opposed to coffee, for example. You have tea. Oh my God, the best is tea with condensed milk.
Of course it is. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the tea with the condensed milk and the fresh bread from the bakery with like the cheese, and the staple diet in Chile is avocado because it grows everywhere. Like, you know, my grandmother had this massive avocado tree in her backyard, for example. So, and we call it palta. So like it's always bread with palta and like fresh cheese and like the tea with the condensed milk. Like my mouth is watering.
Me too.
And then another big deal in Chile is homemade jam. So everybody has like homemade apricot jam because everybody has like an apricot tree in their backyard. So yeah, you also have the jam. Oh my God, it's so good. Yeah.
Good answer. Thank you so much for spending the time to talk with us and to share some of your brain space with us right now. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope that I don't know if I rambled too much about too many different things. So, and I'll give you the titles of a book that I just read, and then the one that I'm going to start reading.
Yes.
If people feel like reading.
We love reading.
This incredible book that I just read is called The Many-Headed Hydra. So The Many-Headed Hydra: Sailors, Slaves, Commoners, and the Hidden History of the Revolutionary Atlantic.
Oh, as someone who's born on the Atlantic, I'm on board.
Yeah, so it's basically this incredible book that tells the story of literally dozens, if not hundreds, of uprisings that took place during the transatlantic slave trade.
Oh, that's really important.
And I don't know how to pronounce their names, but it's by Peter Leinbach and Marcus Rediker. So I just finished reading that, which was extraordinary and inspiring and moving and informative. Now I'm going to start reading this book. It's called Home Rule: National Sovereignty and the Separation of Natives and Migrants. By my friend. She's a very dear friend, Nandita Sharma. And so she makes a very strong case. I haven't read the book yet, but that's what the book is about. My understanding of it. I shouldn't say what it's about. But I think it kind of tackles neoliberal identity politics and really calls for a commons as opposed to a sovereigns. That's my understanding of what that book is about. And she's done a shitload of research to write it. So I look forward to diving into that one.
So that was a merienda for the brain.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carmen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is recorded in Toronto, or Dagarondo, the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Wendat Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and nations recorded and unrecorded.
We are deeply thankful to these nations for stewarding the land so that we might live in peace and respect for each other. As it is outlined in the Dish with One Spoon, One Pup, that all people who live here, settlers, indigenous folks, and others, must adhere to. Radio Aluna Teatro is produced by Aluna Theatre with the support from the Metcalf Foundation, the Late Law Foundation, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council.
Aluna Theatre is Beatriz Pisano and Trevor Schwellness, with Sue Ballant and Gia Namens. Radio Aluna Theatre is produced by Camila Diaz Varela and Monica Garrido.
For more about Aluna Theatre, visit us at alunatheatre.ca, follow at Aluna Theatre on Twitter or Instagram, or like us on Facebook.
Follow and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Miigwech and Yawangoa.